Been watching ball with my big old brain and think the tape needs some explaining. Studying the stats to understand it. Hey, yo.
Talk data to me. Talk data to me.
Welcome to episode 4 of Talk Data to Me, y'all. Again, the idea of this show is to get folks on that can talk about things at the big picture level. Now, we're going to give you actionable takeaways at the end, but there's no one I could think of that I would want to have on more. And I've had some really good guests, so everyone's equal. But man, JJ, you were one of the first people that I thought about. So if you guys don't know who JJ Zachariason is, you immediately need to go follow him over on Twitter at Late Round Quarterback. Of course, you already know who he is. JJ is very well known. Now, JJ, I have been embarrassing people to start the show, so you have to bear with me for a second. But we have got to deal with Perplexity, which is it's an AI engine. And so I just look up from Perplexity. I've looked it up for Rich. I've looked it up for Ben Gretsch. I just said, who is JJ Zachariason? Okay. And let's see what it says here. It says that, you're a well-known fantasy football analyst that is an author and a podcaster. We're safe so far, right? You're the CEO of Late Round Fantasy Football, which offers, listen to this, strategic and analytically driven fantasy football advice.
Wow.
He wrote an influential fantasy football strategy book called The Late Round Quarterback in 2012, which helped to launch his career. Thus, your Twitter handle.
That's right.
Late Round Quarterback. You've served as the editor-in-chief at Numberfire, later at FanDuel, where you developed one of the most popular fantasy football podcasts in the industry. So, man, a lot of great stuff here. And a man after my own heart, you've got a rookie model, and your Zap model is amazing. Your prospect guide is also amazing. If you guys don't know JJ's work, again, you've got the Late Round podcast. You got the Late Round draft guide, which is ready for you right now if you're drafting this weekend. You've got the Late Round prospect guide, which is where JJ goes into all the guys for the draft. So, JJ, hopefully that doesn't embarrass you too much, but the main point being, man, you're very well accomplished, you're very well respected in our space, and I think a lot of it is to do with your ability to come on a show like this and be able to take complex things. That's one of the things I love about what you do, and honestly, I listen to your stuff and think, man, I could be shorter, I could be quicker, I could be more concise, like with this intro where I've already gone so long, but I just want to make sure you got your due. But man, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me, man. Like I said, a little under the weather today. So you can't embarrass me any more than I've already embarrassed myself on social media, letting everyone know that I last night was in the bathroom, had a rough night, and made a draft pick while feeling very, very ill. That's how dedicated I am to the game. So you can't embarrass me any more than I've already embarrassed myself, man.
Was it a good pick?
It was Justin Fields at QB 15 at the end of the 4th round of Superflex League.
Okay, yeah. So Superflex, you gotta get in there and you gotta do it. Just like you had to take care of business there. Right. So in today's episode, guys, our focus is really all around how do you build a winning draft strategy in fantasy football. And to start the show, we're going to talk more conceptual. At the end of the show, to teach you how to fish. At the end of the show, we're not going to cook and spoon feed all the fish and, we're not going to make the whole meal for you. We're obviously going to give you some of the answers to the test. We'll give you some of the players that JJ likes the most. We'll talk about some of the guys that I like. We'll go back and forth a little bit with that. So we will definitely get into player takes. But the real idea here is to teach you guys some of these concepts that JJ's been perfecting over the years, some of the things that I've been doing. And then you can take that and actually apply that to your draft. And in my opinion, that makes you such a better drafter when you get away from being worried just about the names to take. That's an important aspect, and we will get to that. But once you really understand how to be adaptable and do some of the things you need to do in a draft, you're really ready for anything, JJ. And I think that's a big key. So I'm going to start off with, a zinger for you because you have to pick one thing. And guests often hate this. I'm terrible at this when someone asks me to do this right out of the gate. But let's say you have a buddy comes up to you, and I'm sure you have this. My buddies literally do this to me
all the time.
The night of their draft,
yeah.
I get the text, "Hey man, you got the sheet? Can you send me the sheet?" And I'm like, guys, I've been writing all these things, what? Hey, give me the one thing. What's the one thing I got to do? So your buddy comes up to you tonight. He says, "All right, man, I need help. What's the one thing I should do in my draft tonight to help me win?" What's your response?
So I'd say this, okay? If I want to get really philosophical and just kind of make them even more confused, I'd probably say fantasy football is more about the players that you don't pick than the players that you do pick. That would be the philosophical thing that I would say, and then they'd be really, really confused. The other thing I would say probably is your safest strategy is hero RB, and then I just kind of leave it at that.
Okay. All right. So zero RB, big truther here with JJ.
Sorry,
So we'll get.
it would be hero. Sorry,
Oh,
not
hero. Okay, hero. Okay,
be
I
cool,
didn't.
yeah.
I misheard. So I'm with you. I like the hero as well. Zero can get a little bit more
Yeah.
tricky. It will be interesting. There's several layers to that. So like we can just kind of dive into that topic. Obviously, you stated the number one thing, right? Which is, hey, go hero. That's going to help kind of guide you in the way you're going to handle your draft. But what are some of the other really important qualities that you think about when you are constructing or just thinking about putting a draft strategy together? Like, are there certain pillars that you're leaning into? Like, these are my 3 or 4 like core values when it comes to building out a draft strategy.
Yeah, you know what's really interesting is that when you have rankings, when you're an analyst, people will come to you and say, "Hey, I want to get your rankings. Are they for standard leagues, half PPR leagues, full PPR leagues?" And my response is always, I talk about this in the guide. But if you were to look at the difference when you're projecting, right? I mean, you do projections and you look at this stuff, and you know that in a half PPR format to a full PPR format, the way we actually rank these guys, yeah, there's going to be some outliers, but it's not nearly as dramatic as people generally think. Obviously, maybe like a Derrick Henry or someone on the other end, the other extreme end. Like, we're going to maybe use Austin Eckler a little bit more in a full PPR format than we would a half. But regardless of all of that, there's really not that much of a difference when you're actually projecting and forecasting. It's always when you look back on a season and you see Jamal Williams had 17 touchdowns and you're like, oh, like this is where he shifted and changed, in a half PPR format to a standard format to a full PPR format. The real thing that we need to focus on when you ask these questions is, what is the roster requirements that you need for what are the roster requirements for your rankings, right? So like, I build all my rankings for 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 3 wide receiver, and a flex, right? And a tight end. And, it's generally the standard. And then, every once in a while you'll get 2 wide receivers or whatever. But that supply and demand equation, when you need more of a certain position, the demand and the supply then weakens. That means that you should push those. We know this intuitively based on super flex drafts, right? Like, no one's coming to us and saying like, hey, like they know to ask specifically about super flex leagues, but they're not asking about how many wide receivers you're starting. But it's the exact same concept, right? It's literally the same concept that you're starting more or less wide receivers. So I think that's one of the biggest things for people to wrap their heads around with drafting and with rankings. And it's funny because it's the thing that I've talked about literally the most since I came out with a late round quarterback ebook back in 2012. So I've been talking about this now for 13 years, and it's still something that I think a lot of gamers still haven't wrapped their heads around.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. So my draft strategy articles are out for each position already over on Fantasy Life, so folks can see those. But at the top of each one, I've got really 3 rules. And the first rule is understanding positional supply and demand. That's what JJ just talked about. And it's also funny because you get this too, but we get all the questions on social media. You get them in your Discord, all these things. The first thing I ask back is, okay, how many starters do you have at wide receiver?
Right.
How many flexes do you have? How many people are in your league? Because the more that you are starting at a position, the more it really changes, honestly, the way you need to think about the onesie positions.
Right.
So if you're going to play in a league that has 3 starting wide receivers, I just got off of a stream over at Roto World with Denny Carter, with Pat. Denny Carter, your old co-host.
Yeah, man.
As well as Pat Doherty. Ian Harditz was on it with me, but we were doing a super flex, mock draft. Perfect example, because the quarterbacks move up. Why? Because you have to start 2.
Right.
But in that league, it was 3 starting wide receivers, full PPR, and then 2 more flex spots. So when you get in these leagues that are really expanding flex spots, like, that's different than a normal super flex where you might just have 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 flex, and then a super flex.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Because now all of a sudden I can start 5 wide receivers in a full PPR. Wide receivers become very valuable. And that's why you have, and I do think sometimes it gets overstated a bit in things like best ball over at Underdog, but overall it's sharp what's happening at underdog, which is the wide receivers do get pushed up the board. Now they don't always hit, right? The players that you're drafting in those ranges, but strategically I do agree with you. So supply and demand, big thing.
Yes.
I do care about the scoring format, but to your point, I do agree that it's not as big of a deal as people make. The bigger change is if I had built out a ranking set on PPR and you play in a standard league.
Right.
And
Exactly.
That really hurts the running backs that are real dependent on catching passes, or the slot receiver that's not going to score any touchdowns. But to your point, it's even then, it's still not impacting as many people as you think. There's certain archetypes that really get hurt. Okay, so that's a great one. What about value? When you start looking at the landscape, for the current season, that's always a big component for me. So it's like, okay, we've got positional supply and demand. You need to understand that right off the bat. But I think the other question I start thinking about is, okay, what players are potentially mispriced? And even better than that, what groups of players at positions are mispriced this season? Because you can't thread your draft strategy on saying I'm getting player X in round 8, because when he's gone, you're in trouble. Now, if you say in round 7 to 8, there's 8 wide receivers I like, now you have something. Now it's like, okay, I can probably get at least one of these guys, maybe 2 of them. So talk a little bit about how that informs your strategy. And obviously ADP shifts around each year, so that's a little bit of a moving target.
Yeah, I think that there are times where people are way too confident in how they feel about particular players, and then going, like you said, going into the draft and being like, I need to get this guy in this round. But then on the flip side, there are times where people are staying too close to ADP, and I'd argue that's happening in the late rounds, right? Like, you really, if you look at the hit rates of round 9 plus, let's say, it's really not going to be so dramatically different from round 9 to 11. And then once you get into round 12, 13, etc., the difference in player type and player value that you get there. Now, this is more from a season-long perspective, not as much a best ball perspective, because in best ball, we are still trying to just get some production from these guys. I'm talking more about ceiling production from these types of players, right?
Yeah. We're talking season-long here.
So. Yeah, right. And so, I do think that people will often try to extract too much value when they get into round 11, round 12 based on ADP, instead of just getting their dudes and getting the guy that they really feel strongly about in that range. But I think this kind of plays into one of the other things that I wanted to bring up, which was understanding teardrops, understanding where these gaps exist in your draft to know that, okay, look, I'm at let's say you're in the 2 hole, and then round 2 comes around and you're at this 2-3 turn, and you really want a running back with one of those 2 picks that you're about to make at 211 and 302, and you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I really want a running back. There are 2 running backs that are in this tier, and there are 5 wide receivers that are in this tier, right? And you'll get a wide receiver with the other pick that you make. Take the running back right there, because there's only 2 running backs. But even if you wanted running back a whole lot, but there are only 2 wide receivers and 5 running backs, let the manager at the turn make that decision for you, because that's what tiers are for. They're players that are generally interchangeable in rank, right? And so you're playing you're just trying to extract value that way by looking at where these drop-offs exist. And at times that's going to, I think right now with drafts and in drafts, right now we have a situation where there are these wide receivers, for instance, that from let's just roughly say wide receiver 20 to wide receiver 40 or wide receiver 45, where we're going to have our favorites, don't get me wrong, but it might force you, because there's a lot of good players in that range, it might force you to just get running back instead, because you know that you can just wait a little bit more at the wide receiver position. So it's a little bit of that. But I do think that to the ADP stuff, we're all in home leagues and we've seen it. I always go back. I remember a few years ago, I'm in a neighborhood league, and someone randomly decided to pick Dallas Goedert in the 3rd round, regular, not even tight end premium, just a regular 14-team league. And it's like, okay, I get that you wanted Dallas Goedert, but you could have gotten him in round 9, and there's no reason to do that. It's just there's just an insane amount of arrogance in doing that, because you're saying, I know that Goddard's going to be awesome, so I'll get him here. Get him in the 7th. You reach a little bit, fine. There's no need to get him that early and get him in round 3, because there's a huge opportunity cost involved in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. The opportunity cost is huge. So that means you're trading off another really good player to
Right.
take some guy that you think that you might feel good about. And I might be guilty of that this year with Trevion Henderson. Like, I'm so in on Trevion
Yeah,
Henderson, and there are opportunity costs. But at the same time, like, he has the archetype that I'm looking for that I know can smash fantasy leagues. And he also has the archetype that I know, even though I only have him projected in a part-time role, like, it could be like Alvin Kamara, it could be like Devon Achane in their rookie seasons when they were in part-time roles. So it's interesting because Henderson's a really good example because he shot so much up boards really for the wrong reasons. He's just looked good in preseason.
Right.
He's a guy that we already liked. Your prospect model, I know you had positive things to say about Henderson. I already really loved him. I was keeping him ranked ahead of consensus, but now I do find myself in drafts. And part of this, I'm getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here. We'll come back to the sweet spots and in the draft, but I do think there's so much value at wide receiver, and it is such a long, flat tier.
Yeah.
I have found myself, and this is where I want you to tell me, like, critique me. I'll take Henderson in round 3, like, if I feel like I have to. Now, in your home leagues, guys, just so you know, you can check out the ADP tool over at fantasylife.com. We've got it Consensus. We've got ESPN, Yahoo, Sleeper. All these home league sites are in there. And Henderson is going in round 5, but I will tell you, if you really want him, you probably need to take him in round 4.
Yeah.
Right. But you need to be thinking about the things JJ is saying. But I've taken him in round 3, JJ, because I look at the running back tier there and I'm like, this is the guy, this is the one I want. And I think he offers me the most upside. And while I'm reaching, I think I can get a very similar receiver in round 4 to the one I'm passing in round 3. What are your thoughts?
That's exactly how, like, I honestly think that the way things have sort of broken down and come together over the last month with ADP and where guys are being drafted, I don't want to say that drafts are solved, because they're not. But I do think there's a formula and a blueprint for back half, especially spots, you know, if you're in that like 108, 109, all the way through 112 range, because if you notice, if you do a lot of drafts, you'll see that at the end of round 3, you're sitting there and you're like, these dudes are the same that I can get at the end of round 5 oftentimes. You know, like, I don't even have that much of a delta. In fact, I think that I would rather draft some late round 4, early round 5 guys over these players. And so in turn, and mostly that's at wide receiver, right? So in turn, you got to force it a little bit with your player takes and who you do like, if there is a really, really flat tier. And if that guy is Trevion Henderson, if that guy is James Cook, if that guy is Kyron, whoever that guy is, I think it's okay to do that. You know, I also think, like, we are in this world, especially with best ball being as big as it is, we're in this world where we know that, like, ADP equity is a really, you know, CLV is just like a really big deal with best ball, and like the teams with the best ADP equity and quality picks are the ones that do better in best ball over a large, I'm talking like hundreds of thousands of lineups that people will analyze. And I think sometimes we take that a little bit too far on the individual team level, where we're like, well, I can't get Trevion Henderson here because it's telling me that I have to get Marvin Harrison Jr. But it's like, all right, I get it. That's where ADP is, but you got to still use your own analysis and look at how you're breaking things down, and not just, you know, only connect to ADP. That goes back to the tier stuff that I was talking about. It's more important about your tiers as opposed to those individual player takes.
Agree. And some of it, guys, also it really comes back to your personality and the way you want to draft. Do you want to think of yourself as a portfolio manager, where you're gonna scatter these bets across all these players? Personally, I see that as a great way to play best ball. And I totally love the way people play it, but I also am creating so much strategy and content for the home league drafter. I do have certain players that I want to have stands on. And to be honest with you, my biggest seasons in fantasy, you know, I've had my years where it's like, fine, I make a profit. And I was really diverse in those years, but my biggest years have come around players that I did make stands on.
Sure.
And they hit.
Yeah.
Now, none of them have necessarily, I've also had those go wrong. I did this with David Wilson like 10 years ago, running back for the Giants, and he immediately gets hurt. Like, so things happen. Last year I did it with Rashee Rice. I was like, I don't care. I will take Rashee Rice a round ahead. I will take Malik Neighbors pretty much from anywhere in round 3. And they ended up being the right bets, but random things like injuries still happen. So you have to think about it. here's another thing, and you mentioned this already, but it's the draft capital allocation, and you kind of hinted at it, right? So you start thinking about the value of what a pick is when you're in round 13 or 14 versus what the value. It's just like the NFL. You go look at the NFL, it's a logarithmic curve, guys, when you look at how valuable pick one is at helping us predict future, production in the NFL, essentially. It's the same thing in fantasy. These top picks are worth a ton, and it's a straight cliff down.
Right.
And then it starts to smooth out in the later rounds. So what JJ's telling you there, whenever he talks about some of these later round picks, where it's a lot easier there to make your stands, is because there's really not a big difference between your round 12 pick and your round 16 pick,
Right.
and the value of your pick.
Right.
But the other thing I want to ask you with draft capital allocation, because this is one thing that I talk about with people, a really good rule of thumb. So we've talked about supply and demand. We've talked about tiers and thinking about values, how to look at your board, know what people behind you have. Those are really good tips from you. But another one, is just if you spend a lot of draft capital on that position early, you typically will spend less later. And the reason why is you're now going to need to spend those later picks. You're going to need more volume, essentially. You're going to need to throw more darts at the other position in order to ultimately field a really good lineup. So what are your thoughts around, do you have any rules for the way you think about that? Or is it just more general guidelines?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's a general guideline, but I also think this goes into a question I get often in season for like mailbag episodes and stuff, and that's bench management, where if you have Bijan Robinson, I said it right that time. I don't always say Bijan correctly these days. If you have Robinson and you have Jahmyr Gibbs as your two starting running backs, I mean, you might even want to go the insurance route and just get Tyler Algier or David or whomever, right? Or you are not going to have a very robust bench, more than likely. With those types of players, or with running backs, you're going to probably shift to wide receiver because in having those two studs, you probably are weaker at other positions. And then you also, I think the draft capital allocation also goes to archetype allocation in a way where you want to think about what you actually need to really create like a monster team. Like if you have a lineup where you're starting two running backs and you have Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, a guy like Austin Eckler is not really going to do it for you. There's more than, and I like Eckler as like a value right now, so it's nothing against that, but your individual lineup and how you spent early and what that looks like, it should dictate the kind of player that you're drafting late. And the reason I say Eckler's not as attractive there is because we know that Eckler is more than likely, I mean, I say this and maybe it won't come to fruition, but more than likely not going to be like a top 24, 30 guy in fantasy, but he's someone that can, be a single or a double for you, like based on where he gets drafted. Or at wide receiver, it's probably a little bit easier to even do this, where you think about someone like Demario Douglas, who I think is a really solid value pick, but it's difficult unless he just has like one of those like Renfro seasons, like the one Renfro season that happened where he just gets peppered with targets. He's just really efficient. Sure, that can happen, but more than likely, like if you're three wide receivers, like if you went wide receiver in your draft, I'm not as interested in Demario Douglas, especially if I get like backups right away as well, and I'm going really heavy wide receiver, because he's likely never going to find my starting lineup. I would rather take a shot on a higher variance player to make my team that much stronger and that much more of a behemoth that I could maybe deal and trade. Because a guy like Demario Douglas, people aren't going to like be standing at the door waiting for you to trade him away, But if you drafted a Torrey Horton and he's this year's, number one top late round dart throw wide receiver who ends up being a top 20 guy, then your team is just so much more well off. But there are some builds from a draft capital allocation perspective where you go running back, and then all of a sudden, sure, you're pounding the wide receiver range that we really like, and you're getting all these really great values at wide receiver, but we know that some of them are not going to hit. And in those cases, you might need or want a Christian Kirk, Demario Douglas type player. I don't want to say Wan'Dale Robinson because it's even further down, but those kinds of archetypes and those types of slot players and stuff that can give you that floor, that can give you some production. Then you kind of let your running backs do their thing. So I think that draft capital allocation is also, that stuff, thinking about holistically what your lineup looks like and how you should build around how you spend early.
Yeah, and I think that starts to get into one of the other questions we were going to discuss, and we can just kind of talk about it now. But like what the words roster construction mean.
Yeah.
Like to me, roster construction means you're thinking about those variables as well. And so maybe a great example is you take Rashee Rice. Like let's say you go with the 3 running backs to start and you love them. Like you're just like, wow, I love this start. You're laying off running back guys for a long time.
Right.
You may not touch it again until round 12. Like that's in the range of outcomes here. And so you're going to attack the receivers. Well, one thing you could do there is, say it's a 3 wide receiver league. You may, because the way the board falls, you attack Rashee Rice as your wide receiver 2, because you're saying, man, I've already got these awesome running backs, and I'm going to live with the fact that I know Rashee Rice is going to miss some games, but man, when I get him back and he gets to now play with these 3 freaking running backs and this other wide receiver, Tet McMillan that I already drafted, people are going to have a real problem trying to beat my lineup. So once you make that pick of Rashee Rice, though, now that he's on your team, it's like JJ said, you got to be thinking about some guys that could help you fill that spot whenever he's out, whether that's a Cooper Kupp, who I think, is undervalued, depending on the website that you're on, like not as much like on ESPN, but a little bit more on Yahoo and some of these other sites, but a guy that we know could come in and still give you 13, 14 fantasy points per game in a PPR. And if he fills those in for you, it's really nice. The other thing you got to think about is this might not be the team where you're going to take Chris Godwin and Brandon Ayuk
right.
to go along with it. Not saying you couldn't add one of those guys later if they really fell past ADP, it could still be an option, but you also got to think about how many spots you're clogging up, on your roster with, the wide receivers. And you're going to have a lot of them because you took the 3 really good running backs. So any other thoughts there on roster construction and maybe anything we haven't hit and what those words mean to you?
Yeah, I think that it's about thinking about your roster strategically and not just picking who you like best in that individual spot. You're putting like these guardrails sort of around your lineup and your draft, and you're saying, okay, I'll stay in this lane, I'll stay in this area to make sure I'm not getting too far in one direction, too far in the other direction. And obviously fantasy football in the end is about finding the league winners, finding the outliers, finding the players, the Bucky Irvings of last year, the Puka Nacua when he was a rookie, all of that. Of course, those players are going to be on an obscene percentage of playoff teams whenever whenever those players end up hitting. But to me, having a good grasp on roster construction allows you to not just have to get lucky, right? It's not just saying like, yeah, I'm in my home league, my dad's in it, right? My dad is in his 70s and he loves football and stuff, but he's not looking at this stuff the way that I am, obviously, right? And so if he ends up drafting someone who ends up being like a huge hit, he's a great dad and he reads my draft guide, which is awesome, but he also, is not going to probably be able to consistently hit on those players the same way that I would, understanding roster construction, understanding how this plays off of this, how this plays off of this. And so to me, it's about those guardrails and then just consistently being able to hit on those league winners, because you're making sure that you're not getting too far off in one direction and you're really having a more balanced and optimal lineup.
And so let's talk about league winners for a second, because, it becomes one of the most overused, terms. Yeah. There are certain players that I think this year have the upside. We don't always know who they are, but for you, does it really come down to the archetypes? That's honestly the way I look at it. I'm looking for the players that have the most outs and give us the opportunity to spike in the most ways, right? Across their skill set. So if it's running backs, they catch passes and they also are getting the carries inside the 5. That's 2 main things right away. They could spike big in touchdowns and in catches. That's historically, that's going to give you a really good running back, right? Quarterbacks, we know, Rich Rebar, the Konami code. You want the guys that are going to be able to run around and throw the ball. And there are varying degrees of all these things. I think sometimes we get so extreme that people think, oh, the guys that can run the ball are just Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, those guys, which true, they are on their own plane. Jalen Hurts is there, Jaden Daniels is there, but there's another level down from that where there are guys like Caleb Williams, for example, that ran for 500 yards last year and didn't have a rushing touchdown. Right. You go back and look at the guys that run for 500 yards, they usually score 3 to 4 rushing touchdowns. And if he does take a step forward in this offense with Ben Johnson, brand new offensive line, you've got weapons around him. If he threw for 4,200 yards and ran for 500, Caleb Williams may not be Jaden Daniels giving you 900 rushing yards, but that combination together is still going to make him absolutely lethal in fantasy. So when I think about archetypes, and I think about the range of outcomes for these players across the different things they do when I think about league winning upside, more so than the player themselves. I look at it and I say, do they check these boxes? Yes or no? Okay, great. I want to get as many of those types of players. Is that the way you approach it, or is it a little bit different for you?
Yeah, no, I 100%. I mean, I'd argue that the majority of the draft guide, the late round draft guide every year is about finding the right archetypes and using ADP to dictate how we find those archetypes, right? But yeah, I mean, like at running back, you need pass catchers. You can go back and look at top running backs, the guys who are giving you the most fantasy points each year, and they all have basically well over a 10% target share, unless they're named Derrick Henry and sometimes Jonathan Taylor, and so like that's one way. And then the other thing that when you're thinking about range of outcomes, this is where I think people don't think about ceiling properly. Is right now, let's talk about that like wide receiver range that we were talking about, right? So like the low end wide receiver 2 into wide receiver 3 territory. There are some players in there. What I've kind of just like come to a conclusion of is that I'm trying to find the players in that range who I think have the biggest, most sincere ceilings that I could find, right? Because I'm going to get 3 of them, let's say, if I'm in a snake draft. Auction drafts are awesome this year because you can really forego some of the early round wide receivers, like especially like that Marvin Harrison range where pricing is typically pretty linear, if that makes sense, in auction drafts, in the way that like a system might view that player, just because it's usually just snake drafts translated over, and snake draft is a linear way of drafting. And so what you can do is just kind of say, oh, well, I really like George Pickens, so I really like Jameson Williams. And all these players that are in that range, you can't get together necessarily. You can't get Jameson Williams, George Pickens, and Devontae Smith, let's say. It's very hard in a 12 team unless you're reaching for one of them, right? Unless you're taking one of them in like round 2, you're probably not going to have all 3 of them on your team. But you can do that in an auction draft. But basically what I'm saying is that group of wide receiver, there are some players in that range, and it's kind of controversial. So I'd love to hear what you think about this, because I've heard a lot of pushback. To me, I started the offseason and I'm like, okay, that range of wide receivers seems pretty pretty efficient. The market is kind of drafting them where they should be drafted. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that that's actually the range of the draft that I disagree with most on the market now, because a lot of people are drafting wide receivers not based on their upside profiles, their contingent upside profiles. They're drafting them more so based on sort of the 50th to 70th percentile outcome. And 3 guys, maybe even 4, but three guys really popped to mind here. One would be Zay Flowers, who I like as a player, but I worry situationally. I worry where the touchdowns are going to come from. I mean, last year they had 41 touchdowns and he had 4, and his expected touchdowns were still under 5. He's not used in the right area of the field. There's Jerry Jeudy, who I'm definitely a little bit nervous about, because I know Flacco starting would be helpful and is helpful, but I don't know if there is that extra gear or contingent upside. And if you look at his peripherals, everything was the same for Jeudy last year, aside from the fact that he ran more routes than any other human being in the NFL. And then the last one I think is the most controversial, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is Courtland Sutton, right? Where Sutton, I get the case, and I get the fact that he has a path to double-digit touchdowns. And so, like, I'm not, like, this isn't like a hard fade or anything. It's just that I look at the players going around him, the Jamos, the George Pickens, the Devontae Smiths, all of those players have true injury contingent upside, where Courtland Sutton doesn't really have that, right? Like, they have all of these other wide receivers who we're hoping Pat Bryant breaks out. We're hoping that Troy Franklin does something and Marvin Mims does something and Evan Ingram's there now. But then you look at like the situation with Sutton, where they're a run heavy team, or they could be a more run heavy team, and their defense is really good. And all these things where I'm like, is his ceiling like truly top 15 or 12? Like, cause he's never done that in his career,? And so I'm sort of that to me is where, I think about league and how I think about league winning players is, where is that path? Like, is there a true path, not only as a player, that's obviously something we have to dig into, but just in general about the situation and the contingency and the contingent upside that player actually has.
Yeah. So were all three of the players you just named, were they all fades?
And they're fades for me in the draft guide from a
So we're on the same page.
versus ADP. Yeah.
They are all fades for me.
Oh, there we go.
So my perfect draft guide strategy comes out this afternoon, which essentially puts all the work I've done from tiers to then the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end strategy guides, and basically dovetails them all together to essentially, like you talked about earlier, what does your plan look like from late position, early position, middle position in your draft? And I'm with you. I do not want to be drafting those players. I don't want to get too far ahead because we're going to talk about a lot of players at the end. But yeah, I want Tet McMillan over those players. I want Xavier Worthy. A really interesting one to me is Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams is funny because I understand that Amon-Ra St. Brown is really good. I also understand that, Sam Laporte is pretty good.
Yep.
I also understand that Ben Johnson's gone. Like and the offensive line's not quite the same. There's some different things, but here's the thing I ask about with Jameson Williams. I think where people make a mistake is this early in a player's career. And remember, even though it's year 4 for JMO, year 1 didn't play, injury, barely got on the field. Year 2 had the suspension, was in the doghouse. Last year was really his first year.
Yeah.
That was his first year to play football in a full-time role. And it was pretty good, guys.
Yeah.
Did he have a 25% target share? No, but he showed you what he can do with the ball. Does he need certain things schemed at times? Yeah, he does. But who says they're not going to do that? So the question I ask to people is, how are you going to feel in week 4 if either through contingent value, someone on that team gets hurt, or this man just takes a massive step forward? He is a top 8 pick. He's a top 8 NFL draft pick. Wasn't he number 8 that year, I think, JJ?
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure he was.
Or 8 to like 15 in that range.
Yeah, I thought he was 8. But he was a top draft pick. He breaks out his first chance he gets. How are you going to feel if he does have a 25% target share in week 4?
Yeah.
You're going to hate your life.
But
he's the kind of guy that can, if it happens, it can break the league in your way. And here's the other cool thing. If it doesn't happen, do we really think he's regressing from last year?
Exactly.
You're not having to draft him as a wide receiver, barely as a wide receiver 2.
Right.
Depending on the site you're on.
Yeah, and that I think is what's lost in backfields. It's lost because people are drafting off of projection, right?
Yes.
And they're not thinking about where this could go north and where there's room for growth with that projection, right? Part of the reason why I'm not really keen on drafting like a Kyren Williams super high. I'll get him, I think there's just a giant cluster of running backs in that range, but like the two guys that jump out to me at running back would be like Kyren and Chuba Hubbard, okay? The two backs who I obviously understand where things can go well for them because we've seen it go well for them, right? My problem is that if you look at Kyren or Chuba, they had an obscene percentage of their team's running back rushes last year. So what happens? Like, I think that a lot of people think automatically
they're not good in the pass game.
Right, exactly. And so, but they think when they see Kyren Williams and Chuba, and I sit here and I say, what happens if they lose running back rush share? I'm not saying that Rico Dowdle or Jarquez Hunter or Blake Corum have to be relevant. All I'm saying is if Jarquez Hunter steps in and he sees and he forces Kyren Williams to drop in running back rush share by 10 percentage points, 15 percentage points, which wouldn't be that crazy of a thing to happen given how high Kyren's running back rush share was last year and even the year before that, then all of a sudden you have a running back who's seeing 60 to 65% of the team's running back rushes instead of 80% in a scheme that's been bottom 3 in running back target share in each of the last 6 seasons. So how do we feel good about that kind of player, right? It's not that I don't understand things. The outcome might be that he's just going to get fed again, right? That certainly can happen. But then the same thing with Chuba Hubbard, where I'm sitting there, I'm like, the dude saw an absurd percentage of the team's backfield touches last year. I think he's good. I think their offensive line's good, and I actually love investing in the Panthers this year. I think they're a good team to throw darts at and such. But I look at what he did as a pass catcher, and he's been really bad per route run over the last 2 years, basically since he entered the NFL. And that has signaled to future season target share. And so then you look at the moves that they made. They draft Trevor Etienne, and they add Rico Dowdle, who's can play all 3 downs. Trevor Etienne, obviously known as a receiving and pass catching back. what do you think they're signaling to us? They're probably not going to use Chuba quite as much as they did last year. And even just that little dip, you then need other things to go really, really well when that happens. You need the Panthers to be a 55 to 60 touchdown team. You need the Rams to not only Matthew Stafford to be healthy, but they also need to get, that 60 touchdown season, which we can't really ask for. That's a really difficult thing to do. Whereas the guy that we were talking about earlier, and I know we're getting into player takes, but it gives us a good example of how to think about it. Yeah. TreVeyon Henderson's a great example of this, where Henderson's being drafted in a place where we're assuming that he's not going to have a big backfield share on the ground, right? We're assuming that the target share will be there, 13%, hopefully 14%, maybe, we're assuming that side will be there. But I mean, most projections probably have Ramondre Stevenson getting close to, if not more, ground game touches than TreVeyon Henderson. And so the question you have to ask is, okay, he's being drafted now at RB 20 to 24 or something like that. But the question you got to ask is, what if he doesn't see 40% of the team's running back? What if he sees 60%? Like, what if he's actually more of a ground game player than what we're projecting? All of a sudden, he's an easy top 12 running back in fantasy football, And so that, I think, is where people really get screwed up with these projections and, feeling good about floors and not really recognizing ceiling as much. I mean, I could go on and on about it because I think ambiguous backfields, it plays into that as well, where, people are drafting a player oftentimes in these backfields that are in the middle rounds where there's two of them on the same team.
Yep.
They're drafting players based on their projection without thinking about, well, what happens if they just overcome that backfield like Leonard Fournette did when he had Rojo, in Tampa Bay? Or what happens if the other guy gets hurt? Like we saw Cam Scatterbo get hurt and Tyrone Tracy's ADP rose. That's what would happen in real life during the season in the general market. So yeah, I think there's just so many, ways of thinking about upside that just doesn't get captured nearly enough.
No, I'm completely with you. And again, that's a big part of the whole TreVeyon thesis for me.
Yeah.
Is honestly, I think we're probably drafting him closer to his floor. If you're getting him around, running back 20 to 24, depending on where you're playing, he's going earlier than that. I play over on Real Time Sports and the Fantasy Life Championship, and the running backs, if you've ever played over at Real Time Sports, JJ, the running backs, 80% of the rooms you're in, like DeAndre Swift will go in round 3.
Yeah.
So I just don't mess around. I've taken TreVeyon at 3-1 there, but it's because I know the receivers that are going to come back to me in rounds 4 and 5 and how good I feel about those players and my ability to narrow it down to the ones I think have that upside, right, that you're talking about. And so, yeah, I'm 100% with you. I think one other note on TreVeyon, because I've had several people reach out and say, hey, do you mind expanding more on TreVeyon? I've talked about him a lot, but I think the other thing is you do have to remember, guys, that there are certain types of players, and I think TreVeyon is certainly one of these because of how explosive he is, that don't need 300 touches to be a top 6 running back in fantasy.
Jahmyr Gibbs,
Jahmyr Gibbs did it. Alvin Kamara did it, in his rookie season. Devon Achane, in his healthy games, he did it in his rookie year, if you exclude the games that he missed with injury. So just looking at the points per game. So we've got a lot of recent examples of players that are a very similar archetype. And honestly, this guy's bigger than any of them.
Yeah.
I mean, so for the people out there that are thinking there's no way that he takes over the more of the early down workload just because Ramondre Stevenson got his money, it doesn't matter, guys. Like it's in the range of outcomes for him.
Right.
Like you said, JJ, if he ends up getting 60% of the rushing attempts and he stays on the field on the passing downs like we think he's going to,
it's game over.
It's game over, especially if you guys get to draft him in round 4, which is where you should be able to snag him in your home league. So really, really good stuff, man. I love that. So that kind of leads, we've kind of hit on this a little bit, but in the way you've answered some of these, but how much of, your draft strategy, and we've kind of broken down the different parts. You've kind of got your guidelines that are more, okay, if your buddy asks, go with a hero running back build. Okay. But at the same time, you've also got to look at what the ADPs look like this year. So like how would you say you weight that when you think about your draft strategy? How much of your guidelines are rooted in those historical trends and the type of teams that have done well versus what you think is really going to do well in this year's landscape?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that it's really easy to overstate the difference in the way that people are drafting from one year to the next. Like there's going to be like some positions that are drafted higher and some positions that are drafted lower, but it usually takes like a very significant season, the season prior, for that to really happen. Like for instance, and I always say I think that drafts in the way that, and hopefully this makes sense, but the way that people approach drafts year to year regresses. It's not just players that regress and teams that regress, but the way that we approach drafts, it also regresses. An example of this. So in 2015, the running back position was pathetic. That was the year I think that Devontae Freeman was the RB1, and he would have been like the RB9 in any other season, right? And so the very next season, we're going to be reactive and we'll say, oh, we're not going to draft running backs early because they sucked the previous year. But everything just ends up regressing. And then people also regress back to how they drafted after they see that. There's a year lag, right? And it happens all the time. And even this year, to a degree, I think that running backs are getting pushed up a little bit. Now, I think there's some reason for it, like we talked about earlier with that giant range of wide receivers. But, we still see that still see that happening. But I would say
this year's a good example though, JJ, because I think we're on the same page here. You can tell me if I'm wrong, even though you could give one answer and you said that it was to draft hero running back. Whenever I look at this year, I honestly, the drafts I like the most, when I walk away from them, I'm getting 3 running backs in the first 4 to 5 rounds because of the value that I love. I really do believe that the sweet spot for value this year, and this is something I talk about really big in the article, for the wide receivers, it's rounds, 5, 6, 7 to 9. There's so many players that I think, to your point, have actual legit upside, not trying to squint and see it because I want it to be true. And so that's an example. Whereas I have been a very heavy hero running back drafter over the last 2 years. This year I come in and I look at this value at wide receiver, and I also look at the young running backs that I like that are in their primes. Bijan Robinson in his prime, Jahmyr Gibbs in his prime. We talk about the young guys, Hampton, Trevion Henderson entering the league. And I don't feel like I'm having to reach for some old dude I'm projecting volume. I'm actually taking players that I'm excited about their ceiling at running back and then turning around to get it and do it at receiver. So that's why I asked the question, because I am more of a hero running back drafter by nature over the last 2 to 3 seasons. This year, I'm taking more running backs early, but it's because of this dynamic of the value I like at running back and the tier that drops off, because the names I don't want are Chuba Hubbard. I like Alvin Kamara. It could work out, but he's getting older. I'd rather steer clear if I could. I don't like the offense. And I start looking at those guys. And I'm like, man, I really prefer these running backs. And I have this big, long, flat tier of receivers. This is telling me I should switch my strategy this year.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I do think, though, that because I do base a lot of my approach on historical trends, and I can, adjust because I'm doing this every year, right? So I'm putting together the draft guide every year, and I'm looking at, so I can see how trends are shifting and moving. A good example of this, if you get a little bit more micro and not as macro, a good example of this is with rookies, where the market has undervalued rookies forever. And, they do it at running back, but they definitely do it at wide receiver. Like, it's even more so at wide receiver. And so because analysts like us are going out there and saying, keep drafting rookies, someone might say, well, what happens when they're drafted earlier? And I'm telling you, like, I can visually see the data shift from an ADP perspective. We're not there yet. Like, still draft rookies, like they're still really good values throughout your draft. And so, I can look at history and still ground myself in what's going on this year just based on what ADP is saying. Historically, like, I don't want to lose sight of what historical data suggests for optimal draft strategy, which in a 3 wide receiver, full PPR, flex type format does say hero RB. If you get Bijan Robinson in the first round and then you don't get running back until later in the draft, I don't think you're done at all even this year. But the difference this year, I would argue, is that you are focused and you can focus on the onesie positions a lot more in the earlier rounds than you might have otherwise done because of that wide receiver tier, right? So I'm someone who obviously I wrote up the late round quarterback ebook and talked about drafting quarterbacks late. But ever since Lamar Jackson's MVP season, his first one, the market has shifted in the way that people draft quarterbacks. They're now understanding that we need to get mobility at the position. And then on top of that, we've had these unicorns come out. Now we have 4 of these unicorns that can
throw and run.
Yeah, that can throw and run.
Used to it was like, oh man, I got Tim Tebow and he offset Peyton Manning.
Right.
Now it's like I got Tim Tebow, but he could actually throw.
Yeah, exactly. And so like now we have these unicorns where it's not just like the VORP that is giving them the advantage. It's not the fact that Jalen Hurts is X number of points in projection better than a baseline player. It's that we know that Jalen Hurts is going to be the dude. We know that Josh Allen is going to be the guy.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of value in that oddly the market, in my opinion, hasn't even fully grasped or leaned into. Like I'm more of an early round quarter, and I have been for the last couple of years, more of an early round quarterback drafter, I think, than fellow analysts, because I'm in leagues where I'm drafting with them and I'm getting, these quarterbacks earlier than they are, a lot of times until one of the elite guys, until that drop off.
I get a lot of questions on this, and I think it's a great point. And what I've told people in these leagues, like, look, when you get to the 2-3 turn and the questions start for you, is Tyreek Hill hurt? Did he fall off a cliff last year? T. Higgins caught a lot of touchdowns. Will the Bengals offense run the same? A guy I really like is Jackson Smith and Jigba, but if you're scheme change, we got Cooper Kupp, more 12 personnel, they're going to slow down, they're going to run the ball more. Like there's things we could be saying. And then Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, like, okay, man, they're getting older. Like, take the quarterback.
Right. And so like you can do that, and you could, it's Trey McBride in the third, when he's there, like you could go that route. And it's funny, I had Sean Siegel on Late Round Perspectives a couple weeks ago, and it's hilarious. It's like the normal distribution meme that's out there where, it starts out and you have a really dumb take, and then you start to think about it more, and then you have a totally different take, but then you end up with that dumb take again. And I honestly think that this year we're almost in a lineup filling year as you draft. Like you could get away, especially in shallower leagues, especially in like a 10-team league, where the opportunity cost isn't as significant when you take on those onesies early. But I'm telling you, like you could realistically get away with drafting a running back in the first round. Let's say you have the 101 or 102 and you get Bijan Robinson, and then you just decide that you're going to maybe reach a little bit. I don't even think that's that much of a reach, unlike a Trey McBride. And then you get Josh Allen in the third, and you're sitting there with Robinson as a hero, and then you have McBride at your tight end and Josh Allen at quarterback. And then you're in that range that's beautiful for those wide receivers. And then you're just kind of playing matchup and trying to figure out RB2, which is the historical hero RB build that we always talk about. And so I think that when you go hero RB this year, that's actually in like a possibility to just line up
with the onesies,
which is honestly the complete opposite of what I've ever said as an analyst and what I've always voted against, because you're taking on way too much opportunity cost whenever, there's going to be guys in the double-digit rounds that you can use. I'm not saying that in a competitive league or a 12, even most 12s or 14-team leagues, you should do that. In home leagues, where you can have a behemoth of a roster, I think it's a really viable strategy this year.
Yeah, so I do think there's a caveat to it. So what I've told people is, look, if you're going to take both, you can't fall asleep at the wheel the rest of your draft.
That's definitely true.
You need to be someone that pays attention. You need to be someone that's going to be on top of it, because there's going to be less room for error now.
Yes.
And if your league is full of sharp drafters, that makes it tougher. The other thing I would say is if you're playing in a league that starts 3 wide receivers and has 2 flexes,
correct,
that makes that start a lot tougher, because now we're back to that supply and demand question. But if you're in a 10-team league with 2 starting running backs, 2 starting wide receivers, and 1 flex, I do think if you are someone that pays attention, you think through things multiple steps ahead, you've done some mock drafting, or you've done some, even best things that have gotten you used to being on the clock, you're ready to be drafting, you're not going to freeze under that pressure. I do think that you can pull that off. For me this year, I've taken the dual threat elite quarterback more often than the tight end, but mainly because they're like, this year, there are some tight ends I do like later. Now, I'm not saying they're going to be Brock Bowers or Trey McBride or even George Kittle. But there are some names that I do think could challenge those guys to where we're like, oh, it's close enough, and I'm getting them way late. Tyler Warren being one of them, right? Because you're just getting a talent we know is going to be on the field. They love to run these RPOs. They love to run these screen games. Yes, there's a lot of other target competition, but they're trying to build an offense that makes easy throws. And Tyler Warren's built for that. That's what he did in college. So like this year, like I've kind of called Tyler Warren, and I'm not quite this confident. Last year, folks that read my strategy guide know that Jaden Daniels was like one of the skeleton keys. You get to wait on dual threat quarterback because we love Jaden Daniels and he can help you offset. This year, I don't feel that way about Justin Fields. I like him, but he can't offset those guys.
Right.
He's not going to throw for. He has no chance for throwing for 4,000 yards. We hope for 3. We would pray for 3,000 yards passing from Fields. But when I look at Tyler Warren, essentially he is my Jaden Daniels of last year, but he's at tight end. Now, part of this is also you get to wait. Like he's going in round 10 right now in ESPN. So I've told folks like I don't mind taking him in 8 or 9. And you can't even draft 2. You could even draft 2 tight ends if you've built the rest of your roster this way, which is something I used to not do. I wouldn't draft 2 tight ends or this or that. But now I've kind of changed my stance on some of those things of like, hey, it's still a position I waited to spend draft capital on, and I want it to be good.
Right.
So fine, what if I take him and then Njoku 2 rounds later?
Yeah.
I took my upside guy earlier, and then I just took the volume guy that's probably falling too far. Doesn't have the same ceiling as Warren. But if I'm wrong, I still have a guy I can plug in my lineup and probably get 11 fantasy points or 12 per game with Joe Flacco.
Yeah. I mean, I even wrote last year in the draft guide, didn't bring it up this year, but I think that, when you look at the quarterback landscape, because all of the dual threat guys are getting pushed up early and there's not many to choose from anymore. Like we all love Drake May and et cetera, Caleb Williams. But, what you could do is we know there's going to be 1 or 2 players who end up just having these outlier touchdown rate pocket passers who have these outlier touchdown rate seasons. And you could realistically just pair up Jordan Love and Justin Herbert or something to make sure that you're increasing your odds of hitting and finding that dude who's just going to have that special season.
Agreed.
And I did the math, and those players historically, if you get 2 of them really, and not even those 2, but this year it's just so deep. You can get into like QB 22 range. You still feel okay enough about that quarterback. But, if you get 2 guys late, those players will have better odds of giving you 20 plus point per game seasons versus a pocket passer in the early rounds versus like the guys like an Aaron Rodgers when he used to go early and, Burrow, et cetera. Like you will likely have better odds of finding that player who just straight up outscores that pocket passer.
So I think, man, we've hit a lot of the stuff that I had here. You've talked about historical ADP, some of the trends that you've seen. If there's anything you want to hit on there, because you do a lot of research on that, I think that's some of the best stuff you do. Go ahead. If you think we've hit them, we can go ahead and start to jump more over into the player takes. But there is one last question. So hit on anything you want for historical ADP. I'm going to shut up and let you go because you have some great research. And then the other thing, just to tag on, and then we'll jump into players, but what is the biggest mistake that you see from drafters and what is your advice?
Yeah. So with the ADP stuff, I think there's 3 big things. We touched on one with the pass catching running backs. That's always, so what I do is I look at ADP data and I say, okay, in this range, top 18 running backs RB 19 to 42, and then late round running backs. And I group them up and I say, what are the traits that these players have? Because, we do a lot of analysis where we're looking at like what's sticky from a data perspective year over year. But I'm also concerned with what metrics matter versus the market, because some things might not be sticky, but in terms of it carrying over for the individual player.
They can still be predictive for fantasy points.
Exactly. It can still be predictive for how people are overweighting or underweighting that, in the market. The running back thing, though, is definitely pass catching, at every level. The guys that one of the funniest charts in the guide, in my opinion, I show previous season PPR points per game at running back, receiving PPR points per game. So only how they scored via the air. Mm-hmm. And I bucket them into 0 to 3 points per game, 3 to 5 points per game, 5 to 7, and then 7 plus. And then I look at top 18 running backs by ADP. And obviously, the higher the previous season receiving points per game, the better outcomes for that individual season. And how I determine the outcomes is I look at how frequently they outperform their ADP expectation, because every player has some sort of expectation in terms of points per game at their cost and where they're drafted. And I see how often they're beating it by 2 points per game, 4 points per game, 6 points per game, etc. And I looked at the top 18 running backs and I bucketed it out by receiving points per game. And there's only been 15 since 2014 who have been ranked in the top 18 who had 0 to 3 receiving points per game the previous season. Now, of those 15, 2 of them outperformed ADP by 2 or more points per game, 4 or more points per game, and then just 1 outperformed by 6 or more points per game. Now, for context, if you look at a player who had 7 or more receiving points per game the previous year, they basically 3x their rate of outperforming ADP expectation versus like the guys who are barely doing anything as pass catchers the previous year. Here's the funny part though. I removed Derrick Henry from the data set, and there has literally not been a single running back in that 0 to 3 bucket that's outpaced ADP. So, there's stuff like that too, where obviously, we have outliers, but it just goes to show how important, the receiving stuff is at the running back position. Two other things I think though that's really important with historical ADP. My overall like mantra in fantasy football is to embrace uncertainty. And that goes into what I talked about earlier with rookies. It goes into, the concept of ambiguous backfields that I've been talking about for the last decade or so, where, if you have these middle round running backs who are on the same team, and they're being drafted in the middle rounds together, people run away. Like right now, the discourse with Washington is a great example where everyone's like, this is going to be a timeshare. I don't want to draft any of the running backs in this backfield because it's going to be a timeshare. That might be the median outcome. I don't disagree with that. But Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt should be the guy who's ranked highest in that group because we know that there's a lot more upside with that player. What if he just emerges from that backfield? That's what, same thing with Jacksonville. Jacksonville right now, you get this 3, maybe 4-headed monster with LaQuinn Allen there too. And people are like, oh, I don't want to touch that backfield. There's so many running backs and I don't know how it's going to play. That's the point. That's why they're lower cost, right? That's why you can get Bashaw Tutin, who's a great prospect, easily in the double-digit rounds. So embracing uncertainty is really important. And then the last thing I'd say is generally, unless you're finding like a rookie like with Tyler Warren, or a player who you just feel great about their peripherals, like in my opinion, like a Tucker Kraft or something, middle round tight ends have historically been very, very bad bets. If you look at tight end 7 to tight end 18 by ADP through the years, and you just line them up with their tight end rank versus their points per game and how they finished, literally zero correlation. There's been none. Because we see tight end 15 outperform tight end 8. We see this happen all the time every year. And I think a lot of it is sort of like the Greg Olsen effect. Like I made the comparison that TJ Hawkinson is this era's Greg Olsen, where like, I don't think he's bad. I think he's fine. But a player like Hawkinson, based on his peripherals and based on his history, more than likely is not going to give you the monster spike season that you ideally want from a tight end. And so there's really no reason to get him unless they fall, right? And so, it's more about the ceiling than the floor at tight end, but a lot of people are still drafting for floor rather than ceiling.
Yeah, I think those are all great. So biggest mistake you see drafters make, and what do they got to do to correct it?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be kind of ranty, but also like it really specific. So you might be like, why did he bring this up? But focusing so much on previous season finish and then comparing that to current ADP. So you'll hear things like this running, and I know this is like a really specific thing. I feel like we talked about a lot of other stuff that people will, make mistakes with, but you'll hear things like, this dude finishes RB25 last year. Now he's being drafted as the RB39. Explain. Why is he such a big value? Why are we doing this? Why is the market doing this? The explanation is twofold. Number one, competition is just stronger at the beginning of the season because no one's gotten hurt. We have high aspirations for players and we're excited about players. So obviously the competition's stiffer, so it's going to be more difficult for that player to simply be ranked where he was ranked last season if he was ranked high. But then the other thing is that when we're drafting for ceiling outcomes, recognizing that there could be no floor to some of these players that we are drafting. Like for instance, right now, maybe you really like Caleb Johnson, right? And you're drafting Caleb Johnson because it's an ambiguous backfield and you just like him as a prospect or whatever. That could go south. Like we all recognize that it could just be the Jaylen Warren show this year, and that his Caleb Johnson's pass pro isn't great, and so we're drafting him maybe not at his projection per se, but we recognize that there's a ceiling, or any ambiguous backfield. It's the same idea, but people we're not trying to just hit singles all the time when we're drafting. It's more about, this is like the Cortland Sutton argument, right? Like where is that true league winning ceiling coming from? And I just, I think people just enjoy, drafting the Hawkinsons of the world, the Suttons of the world, and they might be okay and they might make the playoffs and maybe they get lucky in the playoffs, but that's usually a recipe for fifth place.
What's funny is it's also the recipe for all of these draft graders.
Oh yes, exactly. My draft grades are, I'm a D, C- every single draft I do.
And I wear it with a badge of honor.
Yes.
Because if I get an A, I think I might have, unless you get it over at Fantasy Life, because it's going to be based off of how I have stuff ranked and projected, which is more along the way that what JJ is talking about here. But I helped my son draft 2 nights ago, and he got done. and like he walked away with a ton of great stuff. And he was like, "Man, Dad, I got a D plus." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "That's a good thing."
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
he's like, "It says this guy's got an A." I said, "Show me this guy's team." The guy drafted 3 quarterbacks, 2 kickers, and 2
Right.
defenses, and he
Right.
had an A. I was like, "That's all you need to know, son.
Yes.
Don't worry about these draft grades. You took Trevion Henderson. You did the right thing." It was funny. He also took Krosky Merritt, and all of his buddies immediately said, "Is your dad in the room?" Which I was. But I didn't say I was in the room. So, all right. That's really good. So let's jump in. We got about 15 minutes left here, JJ. So we'll go pretty rapid. But let's start with the value pockets this year. Let's get actionable. We'll run real quick, position by position. I'm going to just tee us off here. I see the value sweet spot. It's obviously dual threats that are going in rounds 3. I'm in on all of those. Like, I'll even take one at the end of round 2, depending on, like you said, how my tier breaks look and what I think I get at the next pick, and depending on the size of the league. But I do think if you miss out on the dual threats, it's round 9 plus. That's where you get your Drake Mays, you get your Caleb Williams, the guys that, they're not going to run for 800 yards, but they can run for 500 and throw for 4,200. So any thoughts on the sweet spots for quarterback this year?
Totally agree. You're getting an elite guy, and if you don't, I would not. I would avoid that pocket in between the Mahomes Baker pocket, and then get the falling values at. You gotta love like Caleb and Drake May. So I'm gonna just say that I would target them in particular. But otherwise, I'm kind of just getting falling values. Like Jordan Love falls a lot. Justin Herbert might fall. I'll just go after those players and hope for the best.
Yeah, Lawrence is, and don't be afraid to pair them, like you said. So the thing with Lawrence is, guys, he's a 25 yards rushing per game guy. He gets carries inside the 5-yard line. Yes, it was a different scheme, but he's shown that he can do it. He's a guy that you could look up, and he's got 450 yards rushing, 4 rushing touchdowns, and he threw for 4,200 in this Liam Cohen offense with us out now adding Travis Hunter to go with BTJ. So let's talk running backs. I'll let you kick us off on running back. What is the number one sweet spot you see in drafts as far as the round range?
Yeah, I'd say there's pockets that I attack. You get the round 1 guys I'm into, and into round 2, hopefully Achan's healthy. And then, you get into that other tier that we talked about where Travion is now more towards the top than he was towards the bottom before. So I'll try to get Travion. And then there's that next tier after that, you might call honestly, like if you're like RJ Harvey's in that next tier still, when I think he's a good value, and DeAndre Swift is kind of in that tier. Tony Pollard's in that tier. You can attack that, but that's when things start to get. I start to get nervous after that.
Icy. I want, by the time people are taking Jalen Warren and Jordan Mason and Tony Pollard and J.K. Dobbins, guys that I like drafting these guys. I'm willing to mix them in. Caleb Johnson's another one.
Right.
I want 3 running backs on my squad. Yeah. And it's not just because of those names. It's also because of the receivers we'll talk about, but I'm with you. So I think round 2, there's obviously some nice things there. Obviously, round 1, we like them all. But round 2, we've got HM, Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, Omari and Hampton in that round 3 range. Sometimes some sites guys round 4 right now for Omari and Hampton still.
Yeah, he's like the fire. He to me is the firewall though of like that. Like if I can still get Hampton in the 3rd, I'm okay with. If I feel confident that that's going to happen, I'm okay with getting a wide out in 2. And I'm trying to like think through how that draft might go down. But that to me, he's like the firewall before that next year starts to kick in.
Yeah. And I'm with you. Then rounds 4 to 6, I got Trevion. I've got RJ Harvey. I've also got Kenneth Walker. I know people are a little worried about him now because of the injury news, and I do agree that Charbonnet is a good enough player that he could create a split. But we've also seen Kenneth Walker, like in 2 years when he's healthy, and last year with the same head coach, really get the majority of work.
Yeah.
So I've moved him down the ranks a tad due to the foot, but mostly what I've read is they just want to keep him healthy, and it felt like they needed a reason for him to get to take days off.
Yeah, scheme is great for him.
Where are you on Kenneth Walker?
Love him. I've been more nervous about him throughout his career just because the pass catching really wasn't there. Last year, the pass catching was there. Then obviously he got banged up. This zone scheme with Clint Kubiak, I think is going to be a huge boon for him. And so I'm into it. And, a lot of times when it comes to pass catching, when we don't know how they're going to really deploy him as a pass catcher with a new scheme and et cetera, et cetera. But one of the easy ways that I go and I look at it is just looking at the overall landscape of the team from a pass catching standpoint, because with projections, there's only a 100% target share pie, and you can easily this is the one thing that's almost like keeping me not fading Breece Hall is that we know that he could be the number 2 pass catcher on his team, right? And
Because the other receivers are so bad. That
yeah,
leads to a running back can get targets because they're good, like CMC, Alvin Kamara.
mhm,
Brees Hall even has some of that in him.
yep,
But also, we do see these scenarios when you only have one good pass catcher. Guess what
exactly.
happens? The quarterback drops back. First read's covered. Second read is the running back.
Yeah, yeah,
Guys. Now
yeah.
Justin Fields will scramble, but I'm with you. Like Brees Hall, and man, he's tumbling down
That's
boards.
what I'm saying. I'm trying to
Yeah.
not like I sent an email blast where I was like, because like earlier in the offseason, I'm like, he's gonna be a target because he checks all the archetype boxes, right?
Yes.
And then I'm like, okay, they're clearly gonna use Braylon Allen more than I want them to use him.
Yeah.
And so you have to react to that. And I also think that, Braylon Allen's peripheral numbers were not very strong last year, but he's also 21. Like we gotta give him a little bit of credit for, being as young as he is and stuff. But regardless, Brees Hall is tumbling so much that after just doing analysis and looking at like the importance of pass catching and sending a newsletter out about it, I'm like, I don't want to be low on Hall, right? I don't want to be high on him, but I just, think of me as an analyst who's like in the 70th percentile with Brees Hall, like a little bit above, but I'm not going to like be aggressive in getting him. Like that's kind of where I'm at right now.
You're not going Jacob Sanderson all in, but you're also not, going overreaction all out. So
Right.
yeah, Jacob is he's the leader of the Brees Hall fan club. So and for good reasons. All right, let's talk wide receiver. Here I'll tee us off. Round 2, guys.
Yeah.
The round 2 period this year, what I would say is we are loaded with young talent across running back and wide receiver. I love picking down towards the end. Ian likes picking early. I don't.
No,
I like picking at the end because I think you're getting 2 first-round picks this year.
Yeah.
Basically, if you're picking pick 9 to 12, you have a really good chance of walking away with guys that in many years it would be like getting 2 first-round picks in your fantasy draft. So round 2 is absolutely loaded. You got Nico Collins, Brian Thomas Jr., Drake London, Ladd McConkey. Like, I love those. Then the next sweet spot is really 4 to 6, and it depends on the site, guys. You got to go check and see what it looks like for you. But that is a super sweet spot with guys like Tet McMillan, Xavier Worthy, Jameson Williams, George Pickens getting to change environments out from under, being such a slow offense, really without a quarterback for most of his career. And now you get to play with Dak in a fast offense. Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
Travis Hunter, man, like the number 2
Well-
pick in the draft. And this goes back to the projection stuff where people are drafting projections instead of asking themselves, what if Travis Hunter has a 90% route participation?
Right. Yeah.
You're going to hate your life for
I know.
letting this guy go to round 7 or 8 in your fantasy draft.
Yep.
You're going to hate it. So I think those are really big pockets. I do think there's another pocket later, but I want to stop because I've kind of hogged some of them. So talk to me. And again, this is why I like taking the running back, getting 3 running backs in the first 5 rounds is because this massive, massive hole here. And you can actually start taking them early, JJ. That's what
Yeah.
I've told people in my strategy articles. So what? They go in round 6. You want 2 of them start in round 5.
Yeah,
Get one
that's
in round
actually
5, get another in round 6.
Yeah, and you're gonna hit a wall at times in drafts where you're like, I don't really want to take one of these running backs. I'd rather just take one of the, like I reached on JMO in a draft today where it was just more so like, yes, it was towards the top of that tier, but if I don't take him, then I'm just not going to get exposed to that part of that wide receiver tier, and I'm just gonna have to wait, a long way because I'm close to like the turn. It's a super flex league, but I think that reaching for some of those guys is totally reasonable. The other like I don't know if there's a ton of other pockets that I love, and it just goes to the idea that wide receivers are a little bit more difficult to replicate late. There's guys that I'm gonna like some of the rookie dart throws and stuff that I'll be cool with.
Look at this on the screen. This is we take these things for granted sometimes, which is why I have to always go check these things because we draft on Underdog and stuff like that all the time. So this is the last week of movement. So I just pulled up Egbuka and Golden. You can tell me if there's another rookie name or and I can even throw like a name like Pearsall in there and see where they come out. Maybe I let it sit here for too long. But like where you're getting Egbuka and where you're getting Golden, guys, like in these drafts, ESPN, Matthew Golden's picked 98, Egbuka's 119. Now, you have to know your league mates. Are they sharp? Are they reading JJ's stuff? Are they reading other good analyst stuff? Or are you in a league where 80% of these people are drafting from the queue?
Yeah.
And if they're drafting from the queue, you have a really good shot like at landing these players. But what I would say is don't be too conservative. You can still go ahead and take them earlier, but these numbers are insane to me. Sleeper Egbuka at 100, even though he's up 9 picks. Yahoo 105, he's up 8 picks. CBS, he's up 12 spots to 114. Underdog, obviously, we know he's already at 63. And so when you look at these leagues like Underdog and FFPC and Real Time Sports, guys, like so they can sometimes be a better indicator of really where there's been markets where there's been a ton of drafts of people that, you know, are ponying up money to play these things. And so just compare, like, and you can use this ADP tool over at fantasylife.com for free. So I brought it up because that's kind of where you were starting to head with some of those rookies, right? That are in that sweet spot. Those are two names. Ricky Pearsall's in his second year. He's much higher on places like Underdog, but also still very affordable in a lot of these home leagues.
Yep, 100%.
All right, so we've talked about the sweet spots. Real quick though, tight end, anything as far as sweet spots there?
I think it's more choose your own adventure. Like go for the younger players, the athletic players. If you're gonna get in that low end tight end one range, like I love Tucker Kraft. You know, I like the rookies. And then
are you taking Bowers much? Given his price versus what you,
I take more McBride than Bowers because of the opportunity cost involved. Yeah.
Yep. Agree. Okay. Same page. What about George Kittle? Early in the year, we had George Kittle value, and then we all talked about it too much. And not that he's not a value, but he goes at the end of round 3.
Yeah.
I take George Kittle.
I still think he's okay just because that's where the dead spot in drafts happen. Yes. And so you can just kind of get him and be like, yeah, I feel fine about tight end, you know?
Okay. Yeah. I'll say rounds 8+, because like what JJ talked about earlier, there's a middle group of guys where I just don't want to mess with it because it's not worth it. But then you get past it and there's actually names that are really in the same tier as the guys you just passed.
Right.
But for whatever reason, like they have the lower price. Tyler Warren obviously is the huge player for me this year because I think that while it may not go right, it could be too crowded. The quarterbacks could be bad, and Tyler Warren could suck. What I know about Tyler Warren's skill set and the role that he's going to be given the opportunity to play is that it could go really well for him. And he is the one that we could look up and be like, man, Tyler Warren's like tight end 4. He's right there behind George Kittle. No, and guys, the easiest way to think about this is everyone was drafting Brock Bowers in round 9, 10, and 11 of fantasy drafts last year. Why? Because he had Devontae Adams on his team and nobody liked his quarterbacks. Sound familiar?
Yeah, it's true.
It's the same thing. Now, Tyler Warren, not the prospect. It's the same prospect as Bowers, but still a really good one. Okay, let's go rapid fire here, JJ. Just a couple more minutes. Let's just go ahead and hit the players that you've got the highest exposure on so far in drafts. And you can give a brief explanation. You may have already really hit it in the things before, but let's talk quarterback, your top 1 or 2 guys.
Yeah, number 1's Drake May. I'll throw just Drake May and Caleb Williams together, but I think May is the easier go-to, usually a little bit cheaper too. Very easily give us 4 to 5 points per game with his legs, improve situation all around him. One guy that I've gotten a lot, at least from like a best ball exposure perspective, is Bryce Young, where I like the environment around him. And if you look at what he did when he came back from being benched last year, averaged 18 points per game. He actually had 5 rushing points per game during that stretch too, which I don't know is totally
a lot of it was long scrambles, not a high enough scramble rate, but he was a dual threat prospect coming out of college. I have to remind people that they laugh at me, guys. I don't make the rules to how these guys get qualified when they're coming out of college, but he was good at that.
I think a lot of times when quarterbacks are having some struggles, like when they just kind of let loose a little bit, like Justin Fields is way better when he can just play, you know, like out of system and just kind of do his thing. Right. And so it's the same kind of idea that I wouldn't be shocked if Bryce Young just felt more comfortable because he was able to kind of do his own thing a little bit more.
So we're on the same page with the late round guys. It's Caleb and Drake May for me. The other guy, I've got 14% Trevor Lawrence. I really think he's honestly a real similar archetype to those two guys, but no one wants to take him. So you get him even later. People are kind of hip to Drake May and Caleb Williams, especially with Caleb having the good preseason game. But Jaden Daniels is 17% for me through 132 teams. Sometimes he falls, guys, into round 4 of these things. Now, a lot of this is me drafting best ball teams, but Jalen Hurts is actually the guy that goes the latest, and he's 13%. So kind of back to taking those early dual threat elite quarterbacks. All right, JJ, top 2 at running back.
Travion is one.
What's your percentage, JJ? Can you beat my 24%?
No,
Can you raise me?
I can't beat that. To be honest, my best ball exposure, I just have a lot of late round guys towards the top. He's like one of the more high.
Now I was drafting him to be clear, I have chased him up.
Yeah. Oh, I have too.
But a lot of it I've gotten, and there's a lot of guys I won't do that with. Once the ADP starts to go, that I'm like, okay, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm good. But with Trevion, I did follow it.
I'm also on Team Tootin, big Bayshall Tootin guy.
I like Tootin.
I love the late season potential for him, and I still think there's a non-zero chance that either Bigsby or ETN are not on the team this year.
All right, I had one that was Tajay Spears. Obviously, yeah, he's hurt. He's got a high ankle sprain, but checks archetype boxes we like. So I do have 17% Omari and Hampton. You guys can get him in round 3 or 4. If we're talking about a little bit later guy, RJ Harvey's not really late. I have 14%, but like the guy that I had been taking late was really was Ja'Cory Crossman. I've got 11%. So, all right, wide receiver.
I'm fairly flat because I just like that area. But Devontae Smith is one that I've gone to a lot.
Okay.
And it's mostly, I mean, my highest.
Talk about that one just a little bit. I had Ben Gretch on a couple weeks ago. He was not that big into Devonta Smith. So give folks a counterpoint here.
I think the Eagles are going to throw the ball 120, 130 more times than they did last year, just based on regression. They're the second lowest pass rate of any team since 2011.
48% dropback rate.
Yeah, and so naturally they're going to throw the ball more. They ran pure last year. What happens if Saquon Barkley doesn't stay healthy? And there's just things that can go south. Devontae Smith, when one of AJ Brown or Dallas Goedert were out last year, he had a 30% target share, or around a 30% target share in that offense. So imagine that happening with more passing volume. And also Smith has averaged 14.2 PPR points per game in each of his last 3 seasons. So
yeah, he's already been a wide receiver 2 in a run-heavy, loaded offense.
Right.
Like you said, think of the contingent value.
Yeah, he's just good with contingent value. So I'm like, yeah, I'll take that all day. I think he's going to have some spiked weeks. The other guy that if we're going strictly by best ball exposure here, the other 2 that's tied with him at the top for me are Rome Odunze and Ricky Pearsall. So Pearsall, I think the argument is more straightforward. Like he's just.
Are you chasing Pearsall up?
Not as much. I got a lot of Pearsall when the pup news happened, and I just and I'm mostly on DraftKings, so it's that people are more reactive to a lot of the stuff going on there. But
yeah, you get that symbol next to the name.
Yeah, exactly. With Odunze, I thought Odunze, like I infamously did an episode of my podcast earlier in May where I talked about trading Odunze for the 108 in my rookie draft because my worst case scenario was Emeka Egbuka, who would be a reroll for me, in my opinion, for Odunze. And I got a lot of crap for it, but
I remember you do a newsletter on this too, where you came back and answered something around this.
Yeah,
and then a newsletter, or maybe it was a newsletter first
on that. But interestingly enough, Odunze I think was a sell at that point in Dynasty for a guy like Egbuka, but in redraft, I think the gap between DJ Moore and Rome Odunze is just way too big. And since I'm into Chicago and drafting Caleb and stuff. I've just gone, Odunze's way.
All right, rapid fire for me. Matthew Golden, 24%, just because he was the rookie that just hung around.
Yeah.
That was still going later. He is starting to rise up now. Travis Hunter, I'm at 23%. Emeka Egbuka, 21%. He was my most drafted wide receiver. I've not been able to keep up. And I understand the reasons he's moving up. I mean, we have no clue what's really going to happen with Chris Godwin. Is he really even going to be right once he's back? There's a lot of ways for Egbuka to still pay off.
Yes.
But in the home leagues, you guys don't have to worry about it as much. He went in round 7 of my son Camden's draft. So higher than what our ADP shows, but not where you have to take him right now in best ball, which is essentially a late round 5 pick now.
I don't think that Emeka Egbuka should be ranked that much lower than Tetairoa McMillan.
Yeah.
Think about the upside case. They're
about a round apart right now.
Yeah, I think it should be probably more like half. I don't think it. I think Egbuka is at least a top 25 guy, in that range right now at wideout.
I'll give one more because it's an old dude, and I've named a lot of young ones, but I do have 21% Cooper Kupp. Now his price has just been the thing. It's round 10 or 11. Yeah. If you got to take him in round 7 or 8 of some of your home leagues, like ESPN, I'm not doing that. Yeah. So he's really more of a guy that I've taken some of these young swings, and I'm like, I should probably grab a veteran to maybe get me off the ground early in the year. And if Cooper Kupp's healthy for 4 or 5 weeks, who's to say, right? He can't do it. All right, last one, and we are finished, JJ. Tight end, you already know who my number one is. It's Tyler Warren at 25%. How about you?
I got Trey McBride. I'm pretty flat at tight end, actually. He's only at 16%. Brenton Strange.
13 on Trey, so he's my fifth.
Strange is up there just because I like T-Law, and sometimes I'll even take naked T-Law just to build the De'Ami Brown, Brenton Strange things later. Jatavian Sanders is actually up there for me too. And then I also have leaned into Dallas Goedert, who feels like it's bizarre to me. No one wants Dallas Goedert. That's basically the reason why. But like I said,
Well,
they're
and
going
he's the same bet, kind of like Devonta Smith you were talking about.
right. It's the same kind of. It's basically the same argument. He also both Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert had really good seasons last year, like on a per route run basis. So I'll lean into that a little bit, and I like AJ Brown too. Like I've drafted plenty of AJ Brown, so I'm just into the Eagles passing attack in general.
Yeah, we have similar thoughts on the regression possibilities there. I'll name one final one. This is a late round one for you guys, but it is Chig Okonkwo.
Yes.
Played a full-time role at the end of last year. This is a guy that we know actually can be a yak monster underneath the coverage. They don't really have an established number 2, Tyler Lockett. It's the ghost of Tyler Lockett until he proves otherwise. Alec Iomanner, like him, like they've got some other rookies, but they're not early round picks. I think there's a chance like the Chig, even if Gunnar Helm gets a few, reps here and there, I think there's a chance that like Chig really comes out and, is the number 2 passing game option on this team. Yep. We've also seen it in preseason. Exactly. He's really stayed out there with the ones, got around an 80% route participation, which is the mark we're looking for. Yep. So Chig Okonkwo, and Chig's another guy that if I wait at tight end, let's say I go aggressive after Tyler Warren, I don't mind, depending on how the rest of my draft works out, taking Chig with one of my last picks, and you guys won't even necessarily have to do that. If you're playing in a 14-man league, Chig's probably not getting drafted. You could just pick him up off the waiver wire week 1, but if you're in a deeper league, he is another name. Okay, JJ, pimp your stuff out, man. Where can people find your stuff? What should they be looking forward coming out this week? Just anything you want to say in general here.
Yeah, everything's over on lateround.com. Draft guide is available. I've been updating that weekly. I'll do one more update before the season starts because the season's about to start. And then the prospect guide that you referenced earlier, I wouldn't really pay attention to the rankings. If you just want like rookie rankings, just go to my Patreon. But the prospect, because they've changed a little bit since the prospect guide finished, but the prospect guide price is down to $9.99 from $19.99 because it's not really rookie season anymore. And but that guide has a ton of player profiles and talks about what goes into my model. I'm as transparent as I possibly can be, just as you are. And it's fun. Like if you're a nerd, you'll dig it.
Yeah, we love nerdy stuff here. That's why the show is called Talk Data to Me. So, JJ, man, really appreciate you coming on the show. I feel like folks listening to this, you guys are going to be more prepared for your home drafts, not just guys to take, but a little bit of the thought process behind it. That's going to make you sharper. You can apply these concepts when you're on the clock. You're thinking about always multiple steps ahead, guys. You guys are playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers like JJ. So, appreciate you, JJ.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.